On the next Vital Signs, a growing beef with beef.
Our mission is very simple, to completely replace animals as a food technology.
Now, meat made from plants. It's this quest to have it look like the meat that we're used to.
It'll be distinguishable.
This really looks and smells just like a beef burger. And on the horizon, steak grown in a lab.
With very few cells, we can grow infinite amounts of meat.
But will consumers bite?
Vital Signs, Wednesday, in association with Bangkok Dusit Medical Services.
I'm Matthew Chance in Moscow, and this is CNN.
The Trump administration today announced new, far tougher standards for legal immigrants to obtain green cards or to qualify for citizenship. Under the plan, green card applicants who've used government benefits such as Medicaid, food stamps, housing vouchers could be denied full-time status because they'd be considered more likely to need assistance in the future. In effect, the financial status of those seeking permanent status here would be heavily scrutinized. The rule, which covers 837 pages, won't go into effect for a couple of months, and legal challenges are likely. They would apply to those wanting to remain in the country and those seeking to enter. I'll get perspective now from Univision anchor Jorge Ramos. He's the author of Stranger, The Challenge of a Latino Immigrant in the Trump Era. I spoke with him before it aired. The news that the Trump administration is now making it harder for legal immigrants to stay here, I mean, that's a whole new level for this administration.
You know, Donald Trump is the most anti-immigrant president in the last almost 70 years. So this is just another different step that he's taking. This is a president who separated babies from their mothers, who's putting children in cages, who's not allowing people who are applying for political asylum to stay here, and now he's attacking legal immigrants.
I mean, it's you know, you look at the Statue of Liberty. It's, you know, give us your tired, your poor, you know, huddle masses, you're going to breathe free. The idea that only wealthy, you know, people coming from countries that this administration seems to want to attract can contribute to America is, it's just a ridiculous notion.
And Donald Trump is not very good at being sensitive, and he's not very good at math, because what they're telling us is not the whole truth. They're trying to give you the idea that immigrants are criminals or that they're too expensive, and that is not true. Of course, at the beginning, immigrants will have to pay for education and for healthcare and for public services, but at the end, it's just a great business to have immigrants in this country. I was reading a study by the National Academy of Sciences, and at the end, all immigrants, both legal and undocumented, contribute more than $2 billion a year to the economy of this country. That's what we call the immigrant surplus. And the Trump administration is not telling you that.
It also just, I mean, it is a fundamental view of the United States, of what this administration clearly wants the United States to look like down the road. The idea that, you know, whites will not be the majority, I mean, it's an exciting transformation of the country. It's an exciting evolution and, you know, progress of our country in many different ways. Clearly, there's, you know, among white supremacists, white nationalists, that is viewed as a horrific event.
I do understand, but there's nothing really they can do against this incredible demographic revolution. In 2044, everyone is going to be a minority. And then I think President Trump represents those who are trying to revert that trend. And he doesn't say it, but he would like, it seems to me, that's his vision, just to have America look like him again. That's going to be impossible.
So for those who support what the administration is doing and say, well, look, America should have the best and the brightest, and if, you know, that's, in their opinion, you know, people who are not taking public assistance early on, what's wrong with that?
But they're here. The best and the brightest are already here. Immigrants, both legal and undocumented, they harvest the food that we eat. They build the apartments and the houses where we live. They take care of our children. I mean, the country is great thanks to its diversity and thanks to its past of immigration, and because we continue with that tradition.
I want to play something that the acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection said in reaction to the video of a young girl crying that obviously got a lot of attention after the ICE raid on close to 700 undocumented workers. So, let's just play what he said.
So I understand that the girl's upset, and I get that. But her father committed a crime. And just so the American people know also, is that girl, her mother was home, and she was reunited with her mother within a few hours that night.
I mean, her father committed a crime by crossing into the United States. Apparently,
That's another 10 or 11 million. Officially, we are in the business. These governments in the business of separating children from their parents. We know that for sure. And when I hear things like that, Anderson, are we talking about also all the Americans, millions of Americans who benefit from the work of undocumented immigrants? I mean, undocumented immigrants, that father didn't come to this country to go to Disneyland. He didn't come to go to just to see a movie. No, he came to work. And we all benefit from their work. And that's what we're not saying. Whenever we go to a restaurant or to a hotel, just do the experiment. Go to the back room, go to the kitchen, go to the lower floor, and you'll see the people who are really doing the job.
we know. I mean, you go to a Trump resort, you go to a Trump golf course, you will find that, at least in the past, up until it was exposed, you will find undocumented immigrants. I mean, the hypocrisy is really astounding. Even reports of, Polish workers who were undocumented building, doing demolition to do the foundation for Trump Tower, his, allegedly his crown jewel.
And also what's important is just to see the alternative. We've been discussing for 20 years now the possibility of legalizing 10, 11 million undocumented immigrants. There's nothing wrong with that idea, but he's just giving you the only option for them, which is just to deport someone who came here to work for the American people.
Jorge Ramos, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Up next, the latest on the arrest made following the shooting massacre in Dayton, Ohio. A new arrest. Plus, I'll speak with Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy on efforts to pass gun control legislation. President Trump has talked about, quote, meaningful background checks, unquote. The question is, what does that really mean? Is it all talk, no action? We'll be right back.
All new Inside Africa. Unlocking the mysteries behind the continent you thought you knew. In Eswatini, the music festival helps young performers hone their skills to take center stage.
The hunger is there and the talent is there. It's abundant.
Inside Africa, today only on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank.
And I'll give the floor to Clarissa Ward, CNN international correspondent.
Thank you so much. I've been a war correspondent for more than 10 years in every terrible conflict that you can think of, but I have never seen anything on the scale like this.
This is happening right here, right now. Life is dangerous. There are snipers all around. Is that what they want?
This is something you have to do.
This is one of the most unique environments on Earth.
How many hours have you been on the boat?
It's a humanitarian crisis growing by the day.
You've got to do justice to the story. How has your life been affected? I won't say you ever really make peace with it, but you can bear witness.
There are very little signs of normal human life.
You cannot feel some level of personal impact. Clarissa Ward, CNN, London.
In the village.
Many of the statues ISIS toppled were fakes.
$500 for 2 children who sold us like that.
These guns really be happening.
This shot
Hong Kong, and this is CNN.
Good evening. We start with news of an arrest made in the investigation of the massacre in Dayton, Ohio. Charges unsealed at a federal court in Ohio. 9 dead after that attack. Investigators still piecing together why the gunman did it and how. Our Gary Tuckman is in Dayton with the story. So, Gary, what's the latest?
Well, Anderson, the gunman who murdered 9 people here this past weekend here in Dayton, Ohio, is dead, but a friend of his is in a lot of trouble in jail tonight, facing federal firearms charges in connection with the murders. His name is Ethan Colley. He's 24 years old, and he was a buddy of the killer. He is accused of providing a 100-round magazine that was used in the killing. He's accused of providing body armor that was used in the killing. He's accused of setting up the AR-15 that was used in the killing. Now, his attorney is saying that Colley knew nothing about the murders that were about to happen. He was totally in the dark about that. And interestingly, prosecutors here, the U.S. Attorney's Office, said the same thing, that they have no evidence whatsoever that he knew what was going to happen. That being said, it's totally unclear why he provided these firearms to his friend. One thing we're being told, for him to purchase these firearms, he had to declare under oath that he was not a drug user. Prosecutors are saying that he, Colley, and the killer together used many drugs over a period of years. Hard drugs like LSD, marijuana regularly. And that they used those drugs, so therefore he violated the oath when he bought these weapons for the killer. The U.S. Attorney's Office talked to us about the case today.
Agents executed the search warrant of Colley's apartment. They recovered the Draco pistol, the Taurus semi-automatic pistol, ammunition, drug paraphernalia, a clear glass pipe, and what is commonly referred to as a bong, as well as what appeared to be mushrooms. That's what it is. I'm sorry. Colley was then taken into custody on Friday evening.
So this 24-year-old friend faces the possibility of found guilty of these charges against him, 15 years in prison. He has a detention hearing Wednesday to determine if he will get bail, and he will allow to be out, at least temporarily.
And just briefly, Gary, there were reports that, the sister was killed in the attack of the shooter, and that a friend was also with them. Is that this person?
Yeah, it's not clear if it's the same friend. It's not clear. That's what's terrible about this case and puzzling about this case. There's so much not known. I mean, the basic thing is, why did this friend provide all these items for this killer? But we don't know if this friend that's described, Anderson, is this guy. It's just not clear at this point. But I can tell you right now, here in Dayton, Anderson, this is still a nightmare to so many people, but with all the funerals and memorials taking place right now, everyone remembers it's very real.
Gary, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut joins me now. He's made gun control a public priority of his since the Sandy Hook school massacre in his state in 2012. Senator Murphy, are you any more or less optimistic tonight that Congress will actually act on either new gun control measures or background checks? As you know, all Senator Mitch McConnell has said is that he'd consider some form of red flag law, so-called, or background check, but no details.
Well, I wake up every day optimistic because I know eventually democracy catches up to senators who oppose 90% of their constituents who want things like universal background checks. But there does seem to be some interesting new momentum around this issue of extending background checks to make sure that it covers all gun sales. There has been discussions happening between Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, including the White House, discussions that continue this week. As you mentioned, it still all rests on the decision of one senator, Mitch McConnell, as to whether he wants to bring compromise legislation before the Senate. He may be unlikely to want to divide his caucus right down the middle and put a very controversial vote in front of his members, but there is a chance that we could get a deal that would extend background checks to the tens, hundreds of thousands of sales all across the country today, where criminals and people who are seriously mentally ill can get guns without having to go through one of these checks.
Is McConnell's strategy, in your opinion, an attempt to kind of slow walk this so that whatever gets debated doesn't get debated when the public is paying as much attention as they may be now, or emotions are as raw as they are now?
Well, we don't reconvene until after Labor Day, and of course, the worry is that you and many others won't be covering this subject as often as you are today, and Mitch McConnell will be asked to deal with whatever the crisis du jour of early September is, which is why we'd like to lock in an agreement on a piece of legislation that Republicans and Democrats can support, and we'd like to get the president, who has made a bunch of noise about supporting a background checks deal. We'd like to get his imprimatur on a specific proposal, because if we lock that in now, it makes it much harder for Mitch McConnell to deny us a vote, especially given the fact that the House has already passed in a bipartisan way a universal background checks bill. So it is only the Senate that's standing in the way of that kind of progress.
It does seem with the president that he will pay lip service to the idea of, what he's now calling meaningful background checks. In the past, after Parkland, he talked about raising the age of anybody being able to buy a long gun, and also more on background checks. But it seems like often that's just something to affect the day's news cycle and get a headline that he's, wants meaningful background checks, and then he doesn't really follow through because he talks to the NRA or others.
Yeah, right. I mean, I was at the meeting at the White House right after the Parkland shooting, in which the president seemed to endorse not only universal background checks, but bans on assault weapons. And then within 24 hours, the NRA had been in his office and he has changed his mind. I spoke to the president this weekend. I can't tell whether he is more sincere, but he certainly believes that there is a deal to be had on what he calls a meaningful background check bill. The devil's in the details as to what he means about that, but he's certainly, talking to a lot of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle about trying to get something done. And I intend to stay in touch with him and try to keep his feet to the fire, because I know in the end, Republicans aren't going to support background checks legislation unless the president supports it. The only way that we get enough Republicans to get 60 votes in the Senate is if the president is pushing them to get there. I remain pessimistic that that's how this is going to play out, but I'm glad that he is still interested in this.
Senator John Barrasso, one of your Republican colleagues, is the number 3 person in Senate leadership. He said the other day that he doesn't think universal background checks have much of a chance, and is skeptical even of red flag laws, which are supposed to be kind of the easiest measure to pass. Do you think the NRA and others could leverage Republicans in the Senate to vote against even that?
Well, my Republican colleagues are really nervous because the NRA, just isn't as powerful as they used to be. They're having a crisis at their board level because they're hemorrhaging members. People just aren't signing up to be part of the NRA like they used to. In part because the NRA is so out of step with their own membership. 80% of NRA members want universal background checks, and yet the NRA is lobbying against the bill. So I think Republicans right now are in a tough spot because the NRA is not going to ride to the rescue of their members who vote against the background checks bill on the floor of the Senate.
Do you really think the NRA is in that much trouble? Because I've talked to some people who say, look, don't think just because they have internal issues and concerns over budgets and stuff that they're not a powerful organization that wields power.
Well, listen, the NRA's power has always been about perception. And I make the argument to you that they are a paper tiger, that over the years they have lost a lot more elections that they've won, that the retrospective on the 1994 congressional midterms is not really about an assault weapons ban that beat Democrats. The assault weapons ban was really popular in 1994. It was about the health care law and an unpopular president. I don't think the NRA is as powerful as they make it out to be, but that perception of their power is really what's at issue right now. And a lot of Republicans that knew that they were taking a risk by voting against the majority of their constituents on gun issues, now are just asking questions as to whether the NRA is going to have their back. And those are the kind of questions that ultimately may lead us to get over the finish line. Again, I think this is tough to do with a president who was backed by the NRA and Mitch McConnell, who has been so close to the gun lobby. But I've got to stay at this because every day that we allow for all of these guns to be sold without background checks, lives are being lost.
Yeah. Senator Chris Murphy, I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
The guns are one issue. Hateful rhetoric, of course, is another. We're going to take a look at some of the language being put out there by some with large microphones that could be inflaming these mass shooters. A concerning compilation ahead. And there's breaking news in the Jeffrey Epstein death investigation. New information on the guards who were assigned to watch them. pressure of competition, the focus it demands.
When you're in that ring for that 90 seconds, everything else just kind of fades away. You're focused on you and your horse.
Follow all of the drama in the Longines Global Champions Tour and Global Champions League as the best show jumpers in the world compete for the top prize. CNN Equestrian Global Champions, Saturday on CNN.
If you guys, coming to my show, please take off the shoes. It's much better to enjoying for this comfortable feeling. This show, Murakami versus Murakami, is 1 decade my history. If the audience came to this show, so very understanding for my background and what's going on right now, my vision. Each room having my different my identity, but like when I'm making for the museum show, is mostly focusing for how can making entertaining.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's newest business show, First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for a market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, tonight on CNN.
I'm Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.
You've called what Jeff Bezos has built a miracle.
Absolute miracle. Amazon. It's everywhere in your life.
Amazon's become an invasive species.
What's the real cost of your cart?
I think they have monopoly power.
Company insiders talk with CNN.
They say that you are the most powerful man in the cloud. Who at Amazon hears what I tell Alexa when I'm talking to her?
CNN Special Report, The Age of Amazon, Saturday on CNN.
There's a remarkable story in today's cover of the New York Times. It's a comprehensive review of some of the fear-mongering language on immigration used on popular right-wing media platforms, especially the president's favorite news channel.
Will anyone empower do anything to protect America this time? Or will leaders sit passively back as the invasion continues?
If you use the term as an invasion, that's not anti-Hispanic, it's a fact.
So they're carrying the Honduras flag.
Right.
This is an invasion.
Language we've heard over and over again by the president himself as well.
This is an invasion. When you see these caravans starting out with 20,000 people, that's an invasion. We're on track for 1 million illegal aliens trying to rush our borders. It is an invasion, you know that. If you look at what's marching up, that's an invasion.
The Times notes that the overlap of words used by the El Paso gunman in his so-called manifesto, which is basically just kind of a racist screed, in one portion he wrote he was simply defending my country from cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by an invasion. Michael Grinbaum was among the 5 Times reporters who worked on that extensive piece. He joins us now. Talk about the overlap you saw between the rhetoric among some of these right-wing media outlets and the shooter.
Yeah, it was really striking to us. It's tough to read the writings of this killer, but the word invasion and invader are used 6 times throughout the document. He discusses replacing Americans with migrants. That's a stark parallel to the language and the rhetoric that we hear from some of the most prominent platforms in the right-wing media world. Fox News, Rush Limbaugh's radio show. These are platforms that reach millions of Americans on a daily basis. And we decided to go back and look, how did these terms really disseminated into our mainstream discourse? It's really surprising how common it is.
But I mean, is it fair to draw a direct line though between, you know, I mean, is there evidence that the gunman was aware of this language being used in these outlets?
We don't know what media outlets this gunman consumed, and we don't know who or what ultimately inspired him to commit this atrocious act. What we wanted to set out to demonstrate is how rhetoric that demonizes and dehumanizes migrants, the kind of language that once was relegated to fringe websites, to more extreme nationalist groups, has, in a relatively short period of time, become commonplace in the mainstream discourse, mostly of conservative politicians.
It's also rhetoric often that, as you said, dehumanizes. I mean, it's the same like in Rwanda and the genocide. You know, in radio stations they were talking about, you know, the infestation and these people are cockroaches, and you know, they can be killed just like you would a cockroach.
Yeah, I mean, even to use the word invasion, and Rush Limbaugh often refers to a flood of migrants coming over the border. It's a way to take away the individual humanity of the migrants who perhaps are seeking refuge from a war-torn country. There are many reasons why people might seek to come into the United States. When you look at the totality of this rhetoric, you come away with the impression that there are outsiders seeking to take away the economic prosperity of so-called real Americans, namely of white Americans. And you see this from the president. It's filtered into our right-wing media sphere. And it's something that even a year, 18 months ago, was there was very little of it in our media culture.
Yeah, I mean, you went back and you looked at CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and they used the term invasion and replacement.
We did, and it spiked right around the time of the caravan rhetoric that came around during the run-up to the midterm elections in 2018. So what's interesting is it spiked across all three major cable networks. What happened on Fox News is we found more than 300 instances in the last year where the phrase invasion or invader was used to refer to immigrants. And we went back and we reviewed every single one of those clips. And what we found was that rather than showing a clip of the president making those comments, as is common on, say, MSNBC, these words were coming from Fox News hosts, from Fox News guests, and by the way, often high-ranking Republican lawmakers, Steve Scalise, Chris Kobach. These are mainstream politicians who are now dipping into language that really was something at a place like the Daily Stormer, sort of these white nationalists.
So the notion of invasion, that's not language that was used decades ago.
Very little. Now, Pat Buchanan, it should be said, when he ran these outsider campaigns for president in '92 and '96, he did talk about an illegal